It was a bright morning in Crestwood. Jamal Kingston, freshly appointed as the town's new police sheriff, walked down the main street with a confident yet humble stride. His tall, muscular frame stood out in the crisp hoodie top he wore, but he wasn't seeking attention. Jamal had come from a long line of law enforcement officers, and today was his first day on the job, a role he hoped would symbolize change for a community riddled with tension between the police and its citizens. Little did he know that his peaceful stroll was about to turn into a nightmare that would make headlines across the nation. A few blocks down the road, Officers Grant and Riley sat in their patrol car, bored and scanning the streets for any sign of trouble. As their eyes fell on Jamal, an unfamiliar black man walking alone, they immediately exchanged glances. Without a word, Officer Grant started the car and pulled up beside Jamal, eyes narrowing as if they'd already decided he didn't belong there. "Hey, you!" Officer Riley called out from the passenger seat. Jamal stopped, turning to face them, unfazed but confused. "What are you doing around here?" Riley asked, his tone sharp, his gaze condescending. Jamal raised an eyebrow, sensing hostility but maintaining his composure. "Just walking," Jamal replied calmly. "Is there a problem?" The officers stepped out of the car, their faces twisting into expressions of arrogance and suspicion. "Yeah, there is," Officer Grant sneered. "You're in the wrong place, buddy. Hands where we can see them." Jamal's mind raced. He knew this scene all too well. Despite his position, his title, and his intentions, all they saw was a black man. He tried to explain. "Look, Shut up," Grant interrupted, taking a threatening step forward. "We don't need an explanation. Get down on the ground now." "What for?" Jamal asked, incredulous. The situation had escalated so fast. He felt his heart race, but he knew if he resisted, things would only get worse. He tried again. "Listen, I'm the new sheriff." "New sheriff?" Riley laughed, stepping closer. "You've got to be kidding me." Without waiting for another word, Grant grabbed Jamal by the arm, yanking him roughly to the ground. Jamal winced, but kept calm, knowing that any sudden movement could trigger even more brutality. The onlookers around him gasped in shock, some pulling out their phones, filming the incident as the officers forcibly pinned Jamal to the pavement. "Why are you doing this?" Jamal asked, his voice steady but firm. His patience was wearing thin, but his training told him to remain composed. "You haven't even asked for my ID." "We don't need to." Grant barked, his knee pressing painfully into Jamal's back as he cuffed him. "We know your type. You're a thug, wandering where you don't belong." As the officers manhandled him into the back of the patrol car, Jamal felt the weight of history press down on him. Decades of racial profiling, police brutality, and injustice. This wasn't just happening to him. It was happening to every black man who had ever been stopped, questioned, and brutalized for no reason other than the color of their skin. "But they don't know who I am yet," he thought to himself. When they find out, the ride to the station was filled with hostile silence. Jamal stared out the window, his mind running through 1,000 thoughts. What would happen when they realized their mistake? He wasn't afraid for himself, but for what this said about the broken system he had now become a part of. How many others had been treated like this without any hope of justice? When they arrived at the station, the officers dragged Jamal inside, throwing him into a holding cell without even bothering to read him his rights. "You'll be staying here for a while, tough guy," Riley snickered, slamming the cell door shut. Jamal sat on the bench, trying to keep his cool. He wasn't just some victim of police brutality. He was the new leader of the very force that had just arrested him. The irony was suffocating. Minutes turned into hours as he waited in that cold metal cell, still in disbelief over the events that had unfolded. Then the door to the precinct opened and the station captain walked in. Captain Michaels was a veteran officer who had been at Crestwood for over 20 years. He was a man of few words, but his reputation for fairness had earned him respect across the town. As he scanned the arrest report, a deep frown creased his face. "Who's this guy?" he asked, gesturing toward Jamal's cell. Grant and Riley, still cocky from their power trip, shrugged. "Just some punk we picked up for loitering," Grant replied, smug. Michaels raised an eyebrow. "Did you run his ID? We didn't need to." "He was acting suspicious," Riley said, crossing his arms. The captain gave them a hard stare before walking over to Jamal's cell. He unlocked the door, motioning for Jamal to step out. Without saying a word, Michaels reached into Jamal's jacket pocket, pulling out his badge. The look on the captain's face was priceless. His eyes widened as he stared at the shiny emblem that read, Sheriff. Michaels turned slowly toward the two officers, his face pale. "This is Sheriff Jamal Kingston," the captain said, his voice barely above a whisper. Grant and Riley's smirks evaporated. They stood frozen, realizing the gravity of their mistake. "You two just illegally arrested and assaulted the new sheriff of this department." The officers' faces turned as white as the walls behind them. "Wait, we didn't know," Grant stammered, his voice cracking with fear. "If you have watched this far, remember to like, share, and subscribe to get notified whenever we drop new videos. Also, remember to share your views in the comment section so that we can interact more. And together, we will create awareness and make the world a better place." Now, back to the story. Jamal stood tall, his eyes locked on the officers who had degraded him just hours ago. "That's the problem, isn't it?" he said, his voice cold and authoritative. "You didn't care enough to know." The room fell into an awkward silence. Jamal could feel the weight of the moment, not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been a victim of police abuse. "This isn't just about me," he continued, his tone measured but fierce. "It's about every person who's been harassed, racially profiled, or brutalized because of their skin color. And I'm going to make sure this never happens again." By the end of the day, Grant and Riley were placed on immediate suspension, pending an internal investigation. But that wasn't enough for Jamal. The incident sparked outrage across the community, with protests demanding an end to police brutality, racial profiling, and systemic racism in law enforcement. Jamal stood at the forefront of these calls for change, using his platform to push for sweeping reforms in the department. In the weeks that followed, Jamal led a series of community meetings, inviting citizens to share their stories of police misconduct. He implemented mandatory racial sensitivity training for every officer and required body cameras to be worn at all times during interactions with the public. An independent oversight committee was established to review cases of police misconduct, ensuring accountability at every level. The officers who had arrested Jamal faced criminal charges for unlawful arrest, racial profiling, and abuse of power. Their careers in law enforcement were over, a powerful message that these actions would no longer be tolerated. Jamal made sure the consequences were severe, not just to punish, but to set a precedent. Standing before a crowd of hundreds, Jamal addressed the town. "This isn't just about two bad officers. This is about a system that has allowed racism and brutality to thrive for too long. That stops now. We're going to build a police force that serves and protects everyone, not just some." The nation watched as Crestwood became a symbol of hope for real reform in law enforcement. Jamal's leadership showed that change was possible, but only if communities held their officers accountable. His story became a rallying cry for towns across the country, sparking similar reforms in departments nationwide. If you believe in standing up for justice and fairness, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Let's work together to end racism and bring about true police reform. Yes, it's possible. Yes, we can make the world a better place. Share your views in the comment sections. Let's interact more.